If Tyla wanted to use the word colored, that's good on her. Black Americans are just not going to engage with it. I have people telling me, oh, you need to educate yourself about being colored. No, you're not going to Jim Crow my black ass. She could take back to South Africa where they got that apartheid going on. Go back there. It's okay. Take your colonized back there and let them call you colored. I will never take advice from a South African. Understand this.
And another thing, I'm so tired of people saying, well, over there in South Africa, colored is a term that they use. Okay, and over in America, we don't use colored no more because it's a derogatory term. Do your research. What's starting to get on my nerves is when it becomes to black people in America, it's like we're just shooed away. Get over it. If it's disrespect towards us, get over it. Because y'all don't matter. And so we have to be like, hold on, pause for the motherfucking cause. We have buying power, but also we are humans. Disrespect is going to be met with a response. The response was 3.7 thousand records sold first week. And I'm just going to keep leaning on, not even 1/3 the population of South Africans bought her music. So when y'all say y'all don't need black Americans, do you mean it? Or are y'all ready to apologize? Are you ready to say sorry?
Listening to the discourse around this Tyla conversation, I don't care about the music, I'm not here about that. The amount of South Africans in the comments of different posts claiming xenophobia towards Tyla, I find it so ironic. Hilarious. Not funny, haha, hilarious, like ironically hilarious. Like, I'm sorry, are you kidding me? You're claiming xenophobia. That's y'all's bread and butter. Like, y'all do that on a daily. And again, who the cap fit, let them wear it. I'm not talking about everybody in the country. I'm not ridiculous. If you want to act like South Africa is not notorious for their xenophobic activities in the entirety of Africa, like, check your history. And I could big my chest and say this because I'm from one of the most welcoming African countries. Hell, we're notorious for letting everybody come in the door and everybody eating at a table, everybody getting a job, everybody doing whatever. South Africans are notorious and are known for not welcoming other Africans.
In South Africa, my race is called colored. And it's a very stressful term to use in America because I know it's a derogatory term.
Right.
But I mean, that's what we are called.
Right.
In South.
Not once in that video did Tyla expect black Americans to refer to her as colored. All she did in that video is just let you know that in her culture, this is what she's referred to. Respectfully, too. And also considering, she was very considerate. She mentioned that that word is a funny word in America. But yet, black Americans have ran with this and have made it something that it's not. We have been forced as Africans to learn about American history, black American history. We have been forced to educate ourselves on slavery in your country, okay? In schools, on social media, we have had no choice. So we know about your history. We learn about your history. But you guys don't know anything about us. And this goes to show that you're not even willing to learn. You call yourself African, but you know nothing about us. And when we try to educate you, you throw it in our faces and you take complete offense to it. Nobody is saying that you should refer to yourself as colored, or that Tyla is expecting you to refer to her as colored, or that any of us are expecting you to refer to any of us as colored. I'm not colored, firstly, I'm black. But you'll never know. You'll assume that I am maybe sometimes. In South Africa, they would assume that I am sometimes. But I will say, no, I'm black. And the conversation ends there because we know our history. It's not only South Africa that uses the term. They use it in Namibia. They use it in Mozambique. They use it in Angola. Have you ever heard mulatto? It's the same thing. There is an artist called Mulatto who had to change her name to Lato. Why? Because black Americans were offended. offended of African culture and language. So now we had to conform to your ways once again because you guys don't respect our culture and our language, and you're not taking the time just to educate yourself a little bit on our history and on our culture. And that's all we are asking of you.
Mkwezi Silizwe Ndlovu, founder and editor of the Melon Notice. The word melon in the title has nothing to do with the size of my forehead. It's simply my initials. Now, about a couple years ago, onto the scene burst a superstar. A girl from Johannesburg, South Africa by the name of Tyla, who took the pop music world by storm. Never before had I seen a South African music act go that far, and quite frankly, she brought her local sound rather, to the furthest ends of the earth, a fantastic and beautiful thing. However, as her popularity grew and she traveled to more countries throughout the world, what so happened was she landed in the United States of America. And questions about her ethnicity, as it relates to their own black identity, started to, as expected, be raised. Why is this? You see, Tyla is a colored person from South Africa. And colored people are their own race of mixed identities. Whereas African Americans, even though one is mixed, would still be considered a black person. Therefore, Tyla, when being asked, are you or are you not a black person, would say, no, I'm not black. I'm a colored person from Johannesburg. And this conflict has led to, I would say, years of online uproar and very many influencers passing on their comments, and I just thought that I'd pass on my comments as well. Why? Because I wanted to take it from a historical, more anthropologic view, as opposed to maybe just sharing my anger or my frustrations with the issue. I wanted to more get into why, as black people, or black groups or African groups, we're having this sort of tension and misunderstanding. So essentially this was sort of always a problem from the moment Tyla landed in South Africa, with people asking questions as to why she doesn't embrace her black identity and instead wants to go by the term colored, a word that was actually in the past used as a derogatory slur against African Americans. They were wondering why is she using that word instead of just being one of us? And, there was the odd TikTok video, Instagram video, YouTuber video about the matter. But I think that it really did, go to the moon, the controversy, when she had an interview with The Breakfast Club.
All right.
So, yeah.
School me on these debates that they be having about your identity as a South African colored person. What does that even mean?
At this point, rather awkwardly, Tyla turns around to her representation from her record label and sort of hints that she wants them to interject, and interject they did. Saying to Charlemagne, we don't want to talk about that issue, and Charlemagne rather giddily saying, we're going to keep that in the interview.
Oh, I like that. We keeping that in the interview too.
Shut up, man.
I like when they talk from the back and say we can't. I like that. I like that. That's good. That's even better.
Next one, please.
That's even better.
You're stupid, yo.
This is what I feel maybe made the issue way more significant. It was finally on record, on interview, she's asked face to face, and that happens. But more recently, things seem to have escalated. This for, I think, two reasons why in more recent days the story of Tyla's ethnicity, whether she's black or white or whatever, or black or colored or whatever, has sort of become more mainstream news. And this is because, one, her album didn't do too well. Not her album, but the music project that she released didn't have the streaming numbers that she would have wished. And a lot of African Americans attributed this to the fact that they felt she denied them, or sort of tried to separate herself from the African American community and from her blackness, and therefore African Americans refused to accept her and support her.
We have buying power, but also we are humans. Disrespect is going to be met with a response. The response was 3.7 thousand records sold first week.
This led to South Africans criticizing, and it also led to a lot of African Americans saying the point that I'm now, regurgitating. So now we had the typical diaspora wars. You had South Africans saying, oh, why are you talking like that about her own identity and her own history? And African Americans were saying, yo, if you want to come to our country and benefit off of the music industry that we built and the music industry that we fought to get free representation and fair representation in, then you better at least acknowledge yourself and acknowledge who you are instead of trying to be an uppity African and bougie and whatever. And though it felt like the issue was dying down, that controversy of Tyla's album situation sort of took it from, I guess, mid-level to sort of kind of high. And then recently, the Breakfast Club rears its head again into the Tyla world, because I don't know why they don't want to leave her alone. And Tiwa Savage is being interviewed, and Tiwa Savage apologizes on behalf of Tyla for her identity.
When the colored conversation was happening with Tyla, from your perspective, how did you feel about the conversation and just how she handled it and people's reaction to it?
I feel like two truths can be real at the same time. I feel like maybe, I don't really know what the first thing she said was that sparked the whole conversation, but I do know that from where she's from, she's, she was, I think, she doesn't consider, they don't call her black.
They call her colored.
Colored because she's mixed. And I get why that would be such a huge thing here because of, the history behind that name, I don't know. I think I felt for her a little bit because I feel like she's young and I don't think she means to come across like that. Mm-hmm. But where I'm from, when something like this happens, like they say the elder will come and say, on behalf of such and such, we apologize. Mm-hmm. That's what I feel like. If that wasn't communicated, I would like to say, like on behalf of that her or whatever, like we apologize, like we didn't mean it, forgive us.
Now Tiwa Savage is from Nigeria and England. She's a dual citizen, and both Nigeria and England don't have colored people. So South Africans said, why is she speaking for us and speaking for Tyla when she doesn't understand the nuances? Then Tiwa Savage responded to the controversy, and Tyla also made some remarks on stage where she said she was not sorry, essentially. And the Breakfast Club then also reacted to that again. And it's, I guess, essentially just a hot mess. Now, on that matter, let me just also say that I am not a South African myself. I'm from Zimbabwe. I do have a very South African sounding name. The family says that maybe a couple hundred years ago we came from there. But I did grow up with colored people in South Africa, and we do follow the same racial laws. Apartheid and Rhodesia both have the different classifications for colored people, meaning that I essentially understand the culture of the colored Southern African because I am Southern African, though I'm not South African. So please don't attack me, South Africans. Now, those essentials being covered, serving as my introduction, I want to get into what I call the explanation of the divide. I want to talk about the nuances of this issue. The fact that, yes, Tyla looks a lot like Halle Berry, but Halle Berry is a black woman and Tyla is a colored woman. The fact that we Africans are fighting, once again, due to issues that have nothing to do with us and have to do with the history of segregation, slavery, and colonialism. Essentially, and I think this is a very uncomfortable thing to talk about, what we need to realize is, as black people, oftentimes our identities and how we view ourselves are based on how white people decided to categorize us. What do I mean by this? I mean, very directly, Tyla is colored because in apartheid South Africa, and in South Africa in general, even prior to apartheid in 1948, prior to that, white people classified black people, colored people, who were the mixed people, and white people. Separate categories for everyone. And this eventually manifested in what was separation, apartheid, separateness, of all of the different races and classes, and each single different race developing their own history separate from one another. A history that is still carried forward until today. there are differences between black culture, colored culture, and white culture. They are essentially a different people because of the classification that was granted earlier on. Similarly, in the United States, you have the one drop rule. Because during slavery, if you were just one drop black, you were a slave. Essentially, slaves were 3/5 human, and whether you were fully black or half black, you were 3/5 human. You being half black didn't mean that you went to the back of the bus. It didn't mean that you could now use a different set of bathrooms and washrooms. It essentially meant you were black no matter what. So the history of segregation in South Africa during apartheid and prior to has gone forth to this day, and people are okay with their classifications and who they are because it's part of their history. And similarly, with African Americans, their history is brought forth till this day, where regardless of whether you're just one drop black, half black, 3/4 black, you are considered black. Because your grandfathers, your ancestors, regardless of their degree of melanin, were still considered black and called black people throughout their history. And that's why I think South Africans and Africans at large are so angry at the Tyla situation, because essentially sort of saying like her history doesn't matter. And I'm going to get into her history and African American history and argue them both against each other to sort of delve deeper into all of this. So, in fact, let's start with African Americans. What does it mean to be black in America, and why do they feel a certain way towards Tyla being a mixed black person and not calling herself black when she's in America? Essentially, as we know, African Americans are taken through foundational African Americans come through the transatlantic slave trade and arrive in Virginia. Now, over time, there's a lot of race mixing that occurs, and a lot of the white population of America are having children with the black population of America, the slaves in the United States of America. However, this does not mean that those kids are not slaves. Very many times, a master could have a child with one of his slaves, and that child would just be owned by him and also serve as a slave. There were certain distinctions, of course. You could be a house slave, or you could be maybe a field slave, depending on your complexion. Lighter people were allowed to work in the house versus darker skinned people who wouldn't, and they'd be in the fields. But yet still, everyone was still a slave. You were still considered black. Your identification, what you were registered as, would oftentimes be black. Yes, in some instances, like you do see people being registered as mulatto in indicating some interracial aspect of their identity. But yet still, the Constitution says that they're 3/5 human. Now, a black person who's 100% black, they're 3/5 human. So in that analogy, you would assume that the person who is maybe half black and half white would be 4/5 human. But no, that person was still 3/5 human. And if you were just a quarter black, no, you were still 3/5 human. There was no sort of separation in saying, oh, you are part white and part black, or you're more white than you are black, therefore, yeah, you're not black anymore, or you get more rights. No. That did happen with African Americans. As long as you had a drop of blackness and it was evident, you were indeed just black. That was the actual law. And then if we extend the time and we get into the future and we start talking about Jim Crow and segregation in the United States, it was the same thing. It wasn't like if you were half black you could sit in the middle of the bus. You were still going all the way to the back. No matter how European you are, or you were rather, you were still just a black person. You were not allowed to have the same rights as anyone else. You had to marry within, you could only marry other black people. You weren't allowed to be like, oh, I'm half white, let me marry a white person or a black person. No, you were just black. Therefore, when African Americans are now looking at Tyla, and she's saying, I'm black, but I'm also Irish, and I'm also Indian, and therefore I'm colored, they're saying, no, you're just black. That's our history, and that's the history we fought for, and those are the rights that you're using when you come as a person of color into this country. Because prior to freedom, I guess, if you came here, you'd have just been a black person suffering like the rest of us. And that's the context of their argument. Let's even look at their heroes, right? Let's look at Malcolm X. Let's look at Rosa Parks. Let's look at Muhammad Ali. I hope I don't stoke any bad tension here, but these are people who, based off of their complexion, would maybe be colored in South Africa. But in America, these are people who aren't just black, but are black people who are enshrined in black history because they fought for black freedoms. I mean, even world over, Malcolm X is considered a black liberator, a black hero, a black figure of immense substance, even though he was a black guy with red hair. And therefore, black people in America, regardless of the shade of their skin, shade of their skin? Yeah, shade of their skin. And regardless of whatever other genetic history that they may have in their DNA, are considered black people and consider themselves black people. And I think even psychologically, to a certain extent, one could even argue that perhaps Tyler is saying, actually, because I have all this other history, I'm not fully black, could maybe be sort of a dig at them saying, are you saying that we're not black then? You see, it becomes very iffy. And it takes a lot of understanding, mutual understanding, cross-understanding, to understand why exactly Tyler needs to fight for herself, which she is doing, by the way, and why she needs to sort of be like, hey, I understand that there's a sort of tension here, but regardless of the fact that you yourselves have this history, I, Tyler C. Tal, have a history that I have to represent myself. And now let's talk about the colours of South Africa. So, the Dutch East India Company in 1652 set up in the Cape of Good Hope, modern-day Cape Town, a refreshment centre. This was essentially the start of what we know as modern South Africa. So, in order to, I guess, get cheap labour in this area, they brought people who worked as slaves, essentially, from India, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Indonesia. These people, over time, then start, intermingling and, forming relations with a lot of the Khoisan, and also to a certain extent white people. Now, disclaimer, the extent to which their relations with the white settlers was consensual is up for question, obviously. But essentially what stems from this is a group of mixed race people. And just to put this in perspective, this is from 1652. That's a lot of history to ask someone to deny. So by the 18th century, this is like the 1700s, this community is like known, and they're a mixed race community in South Africa, and they may not necessarily be known as coloureds at this time, it's maybe not documented, but they are a separate community from the blacks and the whites, and they are a community of mixed race people, a race of mixed race people. Now, this is where it starts getting complicated, because in England, in America, wherever, you have the idea of a mixed race person is someone who has maybe a white mom and a black dad, or a Asian dad and a white mom or something like that, right? Someone who is just mixed. But this is a race of mixed people and mixed ethnicities. What does that mean? It means, generally speaking, especially because of the fact that everyone had to be segregated in South Africa, a lot of colored people have mixed parents, and those parents have mixed parents, and those parents have mixed parents, and those parents have mixed parents. It's not the same as, just Barack Obama. It's not a mom from Kansas and a dad from Kenya. Oh, so Tyler's like Obama. No, she's not. She comes from a long line of mixed people who are that way because the government didn't allow them to marry white people or black people throughout the history of South Africa.
Because you see, the whole being colored thing is really confusing, for a lot of people. And I always try and explain to people that although I am colored, I'm colored by color, but not by culture, which is a difficult thing for a lot of people to understand. Because being colored is, in fact, a culture. It's not just a racial thing, And I'm colored by color, but it gets confusing for people because they go, oh, what the hell does that mean? Who are you? What is that? Like, for instance, are you colored, ma'am? You are? See, you colored. So with regards to your parents, are they colored? And then your grandparents, are they colored? And then great-grandparents most probably colored as well. You see, so that's pretty much the case.
But now, for example, I wanna just quickly talk about the color community during apartheid, right? Because people need to realize that colored people do have their own specific history, as I've said very many times at this point. but there's a reason for why they were made an other. Now there's the simple, straightforward reason why it's like, why people felt like, these people can't be treated too bad because they're part white, but they can't be treated too good because they're part black. So they were made sort of second-class citizens as opposed to black people who were third-class citizens. But in truth, anyone who's not a first-class citizen is just a second-class citizen. You're just below, you're just subpar. But the reason for this versus America is in America you had majority white people. America was a country with mostly white people and a few black people. That meant white people generally wanted to, make as many people black as they could, because that would help, essentially, right? It would mean that there are more people who you could have as your domestic servers, working in your factories, and you could legally pay them less. So bunching as many black people as black people worked. And also, it meant that, back in the day, prior to, trying to get cheaper rates in factories for your employees, it meant back in the day you could have more slaves, and more people could be characterized as slaves. That was one of the incentives of white people just saying, because they didn't have to care. They were strong enough to subjugate black people no matter what, because there were so many white people and so few blacks. Whereas in South Africa, where Tyla's from, this is a completely opposite situation. Why is that? Because white people were so small, it was minority rule. There were only a few white people, and therefore they had to sort of separate everyone, so that there was no sort of unification and uprising. It's like the way that in ancient Rome, they had this idea of giving all the slaves capes to wear, to identify that they were slaves.
In ancient Rome, at one point, they wanted to make all the slaves wear something so they could identify them. Just up here. Like a, what do you call these things? Like a cloak or whatever. But then they decided not to do it. And you know why? Because they realized if all the slaves dressed the same, they would see how many of them there were, and they'd rise up and kill the masters.
If all of them saw how many they were, they would stage an uprising. Similarly, by having, colored people over here and black people over here, maybe even dividing black people up in a certain way, it meant that there couldn't be a unification force that could sort of topple them down quickly. Because you're sort of stoking divisions, Indians over here, coloreds over there, blacks over there, apartheid, separateness, everyone's apart. So these are issues that really have nothing to do with us as black people. It has to do with our oppression. I mean, my first video was also about the tension between African Americans and Africans, and in that video I sort of said the same thing. A lot of the times we're fighting over things that have nothing to do with us, and that's the problem. Remember, Trevor Noah has a special, and it's called Born a Crime. Why does Trevor Noah have a special called Born a Crime? Because his Xhosa mother and his Swiss father had a baby together and outstepped Trevor Noah.
My mother's a black woman, South African, and my father's Swiss, from Switzerland, so he was a white man. And so they got together, my parents, black mom, white dad, which was against the law, but they didn't care, they were mavericks, Yeah, my mom was like, woo, I don't care, I want a white man, woo! And my dad was also, well, you know how the Swiss love chocolate, so he was just, he was in there. And so they got together, and they had me, which was illegal, so I was born a crime. Which is something they never thought through, because as a family, we didn't live together normally. Like in the streets, my father had to walk on the other side of the road, and he could just wave at me from far, like a creepy pedophile. So. My mom could walk with me, but if the police showed up, she had to let go and act like I wasn't hers every time. Like, woo! Like, it's not mine, it's not mine. Felt like a bag of weed. And one fateful day, because I was never given a race, I was never called black, never called white, I had the privilege of meeting an American, and he said to me, well, Trevor, it's funny you say that, because if you come out to America, they'll label you as black. I said, really? He said, hell yeah. Everybody's black out there.
He was born a crime, right? Because Trevor Noah was mixed race, he calls himself born a crime. So if African Americans are writing Tyla is just a black woman, or she's a black woman who happens to be interracial, she's an interracial black woman, if that's the case, then Trevor Noah shouldn't have been born a crime. He'd have just been born a mixed race baby, and they could have just thrown him into the colored community and said raise it. But no, that didn't happen. Why? Because interracial kids We're not even allowed to exist. Colored people are a distinct thing, a distinct culture with years of history. And to just invalidate that becomes problematic and sort of leads me into my next point, or my next line of points, which I call the conflicts. So maybe it wasn't clear, but I do really side with Tyla on this. I think the problem is, it seems like African Americans wanted to throw away her identity. I get the tension, I understand it, but she has her own story that she needs to bring forward. But for example, if a Spanish person called Julio Fernandez, a guy from Spain, from Barcelona, from Madrid, from Valencia, leaves Spain and goes to Texas or California, would it be right to look at him and say, your name is Julio Fernandez, therefore you're officially Hispanic? It would be like, no. It would be obvious that this guy obviously is now in a country where most Spanish speakers are from Mexico or from other parts of South America or Mexico, right? But he has his own history. And I get there's a collision of identity and culture in this instance, but you need to understand that he comes from somewhere else and has his own story. The colored community has been through and does go through a lot of issues.
The colored people are disappointed people. Penny, we are number one when it comes to alcohol-fetal syndrome. We are number one when it comes to children school-going age that's not in school. We are number one when it comes to children in school that don't finish matric. We are number one when it comes to per capita people that go into prison. We are number one when it comes to people finishing matric and don't get university entrance. There's a problem there.
And if Tyla is a bright light, she should be able to put the colored community on her shoulders, wear them proudly, and go and represent herself and her entire culture and community in a foreign country, in the United States of America, regardless of American history. She shouldn't just morph and become a different person, in the same way Julio Fernandez shouldn't morph and become Hispanic as opposed to Spanish. Why should she deny 400 years of culture? You need to be able to be yourself when you're somewhere else. I saw an African American commentator say that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And it's no, actually. No, not at all. No, that makes no sense. That's not what globalization and, just traveling and tourism and being on tour is. You're listening to a woman perform South African music. She's not just gonna assume your entire identity of her. You can't tell someone to be something that they're not just because it makes you feel more comfortable. She has every right to say, I'm a colored person, this is my accent, this is the music and my style of dress, and this is what my mom talks like and sounds like, and this is my humor, and she should be able to share her beautiful culture with the entire world. Let's actually delve into this properly, yeah? So Tyla, genetically speaking, in terms of her genetic code, her DNA, is Irish, Indian, and Zulu. So should Tyla go to South Africa and then just start speaking only in Zulu? And then when she goes to India, she starts belly dancing, developing a strong love and passion for chicken tikka masala and Bollywood movies. And then when she goes to Europe, she has to become Irish and drink Guinness and celebrate St. Paddy's Day. What is meant to happen in this situation? And the funny thing is, African Americans, interracial African Americans, talk about this all the time, about being too white for the blacks and too black for the whites. The fact that maybe you behave one way with your white cousins and then you code switch and behave another way with your black cousins or something like that, right? So they understand it and they've documented it very well, but they're looking at this girl who is tapestry of very many fine, beautiful cultures, and they're saying, no, pick one if you want to be here. And that's rude. That's kind of mean. It's kind of mean. And this is going to be a bit tough, but What if the roles were reversed? How would that work? Like if the roles were switched, right? Like, due respect, people like DJ Envy, I'll use him because the Breakfast Club is always on Tyler's case. People like the Halle Berrys, the very light-skinned, complexioned black people. Like, since they want Tyler to come to America and be black, would they be willing to be colored if they came to Southern Africa? No, they wouldn't. Like if African Americans are saying, when in Rome do as Romans do, when you come over here, you are black by our standards, are we then allowed to say that when African Americans come to Africa, you have to be black by our standards? Because what if you don't necessarily qualify? You wouldn't be okay with being called a colored person, would you? You know? So we need to respect where we come from and not where we happen to be in that instance. We need to understand our guests when they come into our house. Because I'm pretty sure that if the rules were reversed, this would be a completely different story. But there is a caveat to that. And an important caveat which I'd be remiss if I didn't say. The word colored in America was used, and I said this earlier in the video, as a derogatory term. Therefore, maybe one could then ask, is it really a fair comparison, what I just said? And I'll say yeah. Because colored is not a bad term in Africa. And if you're saying that we can't call African Americans colored people if they look like colored people and are interracial when they come to Africa because you were called coloreds in America, then what you're saying is that you want us to respect your history even when you're not in America. So do the same thing for Tyler. And I am sympathetic, and I think that's actually the strongest point for why I think African Americans really don't like Tyler, or rather don't like her calling herself colored. But even in that context of the fact that in America black people were called colored, there still needs to be some leeway there, you know? It's like the word black in Spanish is negro. If a white guy is talking about how much he hates black ties and he says, I hate negro, or something like that, that wouldn't make him a racist just because he's saying it in America, where the N-word carries more significant weight. And similarly, if a black Hispanic person identifies themselves as Negroes, like I'm a Negro, they're not being self-discriminatory, they're just speaking their language. You know, the cultural context does matter where the person comes from. And there should be you should maybe to a certain extent understand why people would be angry or have pause when you say it the first time. But I do think after an explanation, such matters should be dealt with understanding and calm. But more importantly, and I do think this is a very important point, it needs to be understood that when Tyler sings she's colored, she's not saying I'm not black. That's not what she's saying. What Tyler's really saying is, I am also ABCD. She's saying I am also Irish. I am also Indian. I am a variety of things. And the collective term for this is colored. Why should Tyler say she's black and not say she's white and Irish? And not say that she's Indian? Why? There are Indians who are Tyler's complexion. People like Mindy Kaling, the guy who played Rajesh Kutrapali in Big Bang Theory, Aziz Ansari. She could be a dark-skinned Indian. Why does she have to pick blackness? I get it, because of the American social dynamic. But aren't you also telling her to deny those identities? And why should she? She's as much Indian and Zulu as she is Irish, and not vice versa, but all three of those points intermingled. So a colored person isn't saying, hey, I'm not black. It's saying, hey, I'm also all of these other things, and my community calls it this word, and we need to respect that. But also, and let this be like sort of my final point before my conclusion. Tyler's right. Like, if we're being honest with each other here, Race is a social construct in America, and that's fine. But from a genetic perspective, a scientific perspective, 1 + 1 = 2 and not 5. Tyla is not a black woman. She's a black woman who is also other things. To emphatically call her just black is incorrect. Race is a social construct in America, so it becomes different. And I understand that, as I've explained. And if I ever meet DJ Envy or any person from America who's biracial and they say, oh, I identify as a black person, I'll shake their hand and I'll treat you as black man to black man. No questions asked. But if we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty of things, being black is being black, being white is being white, and being anything else is being a mixture of those two things. Water is water, milk is milk, and you can put water and milk together, it'll be both of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with being biracial. But I'm saying to vilify someone for something that they're actually technically, scientifically 100% correct in saying I'm mixed, I'm not black, just because of your own social standards based off of your one country out of all the countries in the world, is sort of unfair. But interestingly enough, 23andMe, for example, and Ancestry.com, which are two websites that do genetic testing so you can find out where you're from, historically, like your genetic makeup. Never has there been a time in the history of those companies testing when an African American will send some blood DNA and it will come back that they're 100% sub-Saharan African, 50% Congo, 50% Ghana. That's never happened. And that's why this is so interesting. Because it means that technically, Tyla has more in common, and the colored community of South Africa has more in common with African Americans, genetically, than they do with me. I'm pretty sure I'm 100% sub-Saharan African. I know like the villages I emerged from and all that stuff. Some of them in South Africa, funnily enough. But, in terms of people who may have a history of early slavery a very long time ago, like with the original settlers in the Cape of Good Hope, and with the African American experience, who had interracial relations with the white settlers and the white oppressors at the time, sometimes against their will. People who have now emerged to be culturally dominant and strong uniting forces. This is colored people and African Americans. Because never has it been before seen that African Americans are completely black. Meaning perhaps if the apartheid government had the tools and mechanisms to determine, maybe through genetic testing back then if it was available, they would have classified African Americans as coloreds. And if coloreds were in America, they'd have been classified as black. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is so sad about all of these fights that we get into as Africans, because this isn't us. This is what history has done to us, and how we're failing to understand the nuances of all of these pains. And that will definitely take some time. But in the meantime, what I would advise, if you choose to listen to me for whatever strange reason, is that in the face of such conflict, let's always move to the side of love, understanding, and pause, and just being calm. These fights can't keep on happening when every other race is just chilling. You know what I mean? Because regardless of the fact that maybe there's never been a African American who has 100% sub-Saharan African DNA, I would never look at a black person who says they identify as black and say, I'm actually, buddy, you're an African or you're a colored. I'd never do that. I always have to err on the side of respect. And that has to happen throughout the entire world. Remember, someone like Bob Marley. Bob Marley was half black, half white, right? But I don't think he considered himself half black and half white. He was just a Jamaican black man and was viewed by the world as that. Whereas in South America, you'd have classifications, racial classifications like mulatto, where people would be half black and half white. And they would have that classification. That's them over there. And then in South Africa, it would be colored people. And then in America, you would have them just all be considered black regardless. These are all different stories, but we're all We're all part of one community. It's like Tyla said, she never said she's not black. She's just saying she's colored, which means she's other things. She's a variety. Let her be that. Her blackness is there. It's understood. She gets it. She gets it. But why should we tell her to be something instead of embracing the vast beauty of all the different forms of Africanness and blackness that exist? I used Tyla and Halle Berry earlier because they do have similar features, for example. I may look the same. And for example, like, you know, imagine a meeting between them should be something of the nature of, you know, like, hey, I'm Tyla, I'm South African. I'm a colored person. And then Halle Berry will be like, oh, I'm a black person. And then Tyla will say, oh, I'm colored because I'm mixed. And then Halle Berry will say, oh, I'm mixed as well. And Tyla will say, oh yeah, but, you know, where I'm from, the way things were set up, you know, we had our own different classification. We take that name on bank forms and everything. And I am black and I'm also other cultures, but it's just what it is, you know? But my blackness is there, and hello, sister. And then Halle Berry can also similarly look back at Tyla and say, oh, that's very funny. You know, with us, because we're African Americans, I'm considered black, but I also do have different genetics going through my veins, and that's okay.
My mom is African woman. My father's Swiss from Switzerland, so he was a white man. And so I look like this, and then my mom remarried a black man, so my brothers don't look like me either. So my brother one day, I pick him up from school, and he gets in the car, and he's like, he's just deflated. He's like, I just don't know what to do with kids. Like today, one of my friends said, how can your brother be white? He's not white, he's mixed. Then he said, but you're not mixed, you don't look the same. How can your brother not look the same? So then I'm like, so what did you say to him? And he's like, Trevor, like, I'd have to explain it the way kids understand. People are like chocolates. Like you can have like a white chocolate, and you can have a dark chocolate, and you can have a milk chocolate. But it's all Nestle, okay?